Have you ever noticed how the most damaging words are often delivered in the calmest voices? How someone can dismantle your entire sense of reality while never raising their voice above a conversational tone. If you've ever been told you're overreacting when you were simply having a human response to being dismissed, if you've ever felt crazy for feeling hurt when someone claims they were just joking or just asking, if you've ever wondered why you always end up apologizing in arguments where you were the one who was wrong, then you already know this story, because you've lived some version of it too. Claire thought she was in a normal marriage with typical disagreements. Sure, they argued sometimes, but whose relationship is perfect? She'd learned to pick her battles, to stay calm, to express herself reasonably. All the things we're told make us good communicators, good partners, good women. But somewhere between all that careful communication and emotional regulation, she'd lost the ability to trust her own perception of reality. And it took one ordinary Tuesday evening, one dismissive phrase in her own kitchen, to finally wake her up to the "you're overreacting" gaslighting pattern she'd been trapped in for years. What happened next wasn't what anyone expected, least of all David. Claire didn't argue or explain or try once again to make him understand her perspective. Instead, she did something far more powerful, far more terrifying to someone who'd built his dominance on her self-doubt. She simply stopped seeking his validation. And that quiet act of trusting herself off reacting in a way he couldn't control, dismiss, or reframe changed everything. This is the story of how 3 words revealed an entire pattern of emotional manipulation, marriage tactics, and how one woman's refusal to explain herself became her path back to sanity and self-trust. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing particularly special about it. Claire was chopping vegetables for dinner, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board filling the ordinary domestic setting of their small kitchen. The radio played softly in the background, and the smell of garlic sautéing in olive oil made everything feel almost perfect, almost like the life she'd imagined when they first got married. These were the moments she'd always treasured, the simple, everyday rituals of building a home together, of being a team. When David walked in and casually mentioned he'd invited his boss over for dinner on Friday without asking her first, the conversation seemed harmless at first. "Oh, I meant to tell you earlier," he said, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "Bill and his wife are coming over. Nothing fancy, just casual." Claire paused mid-chop, feeling that familiar tightness in her chest. Friday was her only evening off that week, the one night she'd planned to finally relax after an exhausting month. But she expected understanding. Surely he'd see why this was inconvenient, why a heads-up would have been appreciated. "I wish you'd asked me first," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady and reasonable. "I had plans for Friday, and I'm really exhausted. Plus, the house needs a deep clean if we're having guests, and I just don't have the energy right now." Her words weren't accusatory, just honest. She was simply stating her reality, her emotional guard lowered because this was her husband, her partner, the person who was supposed to care about her well-being as much as his own networking opportunities. What she didn't realize in that moment was that this simple, honest expression of her feelings was about to trigger a pattern she'd experienced 100 times before but never quite named. The toxic marriage story was about to unfold right there between the cutting board and the refrigerator, in the space where she thought she was safe to be vulnerable. David's expression shifted not to understanding or apology, but to something else entirely, something that made her stomach drop even before he opened his mouth to speak. David set his beer down on the counter with deliberate slowness, that particular movement he made when he was about to set her straight about something. His voice stayed perfectly even, almost soothing, as if he were talking to an upset child rather than his wife. "Claire, come on," he said, and there was something in that tone, condescending wrapped in patience, that made her feel small before he even continued. The husband minimizes emotions with surgical precision, making reasonableness itself feel like a weapon aimed directly at her sense of reality. Then came the phrase that would echo in her mind for days: "You're overreacting." 3 words, delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that for a moment she almost believed him. "It's just dinner," he continued, his tone suggesting that her concerns were not just invalid but slightly absurd. "You're making this into something way bigger than it needs to be. I don't understand why you're getting so worked up over something so simple. It's not like I asked you to cater a wedding." The kitchen argument gaslighting was in full effect, though she didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. What made it so insidious was how he reframed reality to assert dominance without ever raising his voice. Her exhaustion became making excuses. Her need for advance notice became being controlling. Her perfectly reasonable boundary became evidence of her irrationality, her oversensitivity, her inability to just go with the flow like a normal person would. The controlling husband sat there with his beer, looking almost concerned about her emotional state, as if her reaction was the problem rather than his complete dismissal of her feelings. Claire felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, that disorienting sensation of having her reality rewritten in real time. She'd clearly stated her needs: time, energy, consideration, but somehow the conversation had morphed into a discussion of her character flaws. The emotional authority imposed was absolute. He got to decide what was reasonable to feel and what wasn't, what mattered and what didn't, whose reality would be accepted as truth. And the worst part? She could already feel herself doubting her own initial reaction, wondering if maybe she really was making too big a deal out of this. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier, as David continued his calm dismantling of her perspective. "You always do this," he said with a sigh that suggested profound disappointment. "Every time I try to do something for my career, you find a reason why it's inconvenient for you. Do you know how that makes me feel?" Somehow, her feelings dismissed as irrational had transformed into his victimhood, and she was left standing there with a knife in one hand and a half-chopped onion, wondering how she'd become the villain in this story. His tone stays controlled, condescending in a way that left no fingerprints, no evidence she could point to later and say, "See? This is wrong." If he'd yelled, if he'd been cruel in an obvious way, she might have found the clarity to push back. But this? This careful, measured explanation of why her feelings were incorrect, why her perception was flawed, why she needed to see things from a more reasonable perspective. It was like fighting smoke, impossible to grasp, impossible to prove, impossible to defend against without sounding exactly as irrational as he was suggesting she was. The protagonist second-guesses herself even as she stands there, even as some deep part of her knows this isn't right. "Maybe I am overreacting," she heard herself say, the words tasting like surrender. "I guess I could make it work." The emotional manipulation marriage dynamics had done their job so efficiently that she was now volunteering to dismiss her own needs, to gaslight herself on his behalf. She watched herself shrink in real time, her voice getting quieter, her certainty evaporating like steam from the pot on the stove. What made this silent humiliation particularly crushing was the compliance expected as the only acceptable outcome. There was no world in which David would hear her concerns and say, "You know what? You're right. Let me reschedule." That option didn't exist in the reality he'd constructed, where her exhaustion was negotiable, her boundaries were suggestions, and his priorities were simply facts of life that required her accommodation. And she knew, standing there in that kitchen, that if she didn't comply, if she held her ground, the punishment would be subtle but real: the silent treatment, the heavy sighs, the weeks of being made to feel like she'd failed at being a supportive wife. But something shifted in Claire in that moment, something so subtle that David didn't even notice. Instead of continuing to explain herself, instead of trying to make him understand or defending her right to have feelings, the protagonist stays composed in a way that was entirely new. She simply set down the knife, wiped her hands on a dish tag, and looked at him with an expression that was neither angry nor defeated. It was something else entirely: observant, measured, awake. "Okay," she said quietly, and the word hung in the air between them like a period at the end of a sentence rather than the beginning of negotiation. There was no argument or explanation, no attempt to justify her initial reaction or convince him she had valid reasons for her concerns. She didn't apologize for overreacting or promise to be more flexible in the future. She just acknowledged his statement with that single word and turned back to the cutting board, resuming her chopping with a steadiness that felt almost eerie in its calmness. David seemed satisfied with this response, probably interpreting her quiet acknowledgement as the compliance had been angling for all along. "Great," he said, his tone brightening immediately. "I knew you'd understand once you thought about it rationally. It'll be fine, you'll see. You always pull these things off." He grabbed his beer and headed toward the living room, the conversation apparently resolved in his mind, the dark relationship drama of the moment already forgotten because he'd gotten what he wanted. But Claire wasn't resolved. She was watching. For the first time in their marriage, she wasn't trying to convince herself that his perspective made sense or that her feelings were the problem. She was engaged in internal observation of a pattern she'd been living inside for years without seeing it clearly. As she continued preparing dinner, her hands moved through familiar motions while her mind catalogued everything: his tone, his tactics, the way he'd reframed her exhaustion as her character flaw, the way "you're overreacting" had become his go-to phrase whenever she dared to have needs that inconvenienced him. Over the next few days, Claire found herself replaying not just that kitchen conversation, but countless others that followed the exact same script. The time she'd expressed hurt about him canceling their anniversary dinner, and had told her she was being dramatic. The moment she'd asked him to help more with household tasks, and had sighed about her nagging. The afternoon she'd cried about feeling invisible in their marriage, and had accused her of always playing the victim. Each memory landed with devastating clarity now, revealing a recognition of repeated gaslighting she could no longer ignore. What struck her most powerfully was the realization that calm equals control in David's world. He'd weaponized his even tone, his reasonable demeanor, his ability to stay rational while she became emotional. The "you're overreacting" gaslighting phrase wasn't just a dismissal, it was a power move, a way to position himself as the stable, logical one and her as the unstable, irrational one. And it had worked for years because she'd internalized his framework, believing that whoever stayed calmer in an argument was automatically more right, more trustworthy, more credible. But now, emotional clarity replaces doubt like sunlight burning through fog. Claire wasn't overreacting when she asked for consideration. She wasn't being dramatic when she expressed exhaustion. She wasn't playing the victim when she named her hurt. She was simply being human, having feelings, expressing needs, expecting partnership. And the fact that David had systematically taught her to distrust her own emotional reality, to see her perfectly valid responses as character flaws, was perhaps the most profound betrayal of all. The decision to stop explaining didn't come with fanfare or announcement. It came quietly, persistently, like a truth she couldn't unlearn once she'd seen it. Claire realized that she'd spent years trying to make David understand her perspective, as if the right combination of words would finally make him care about her feelings. But the problem was never her communication skills, it was his unwillingness to see her as an equal authority on her own experience. And you can't explain your way into mattering to someone who's invested in your insignificance. So she stopped trying. And in that stopping, something powerful began. Friday came, and Claire did something that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. When David came home expecting to find the house spotless and dinner preparations underway, he found her sitting on the couch reading a book, still in her work clothes. The house looked exactly as it had that morning, livid, comfortable, but certainly not guest-ready. "What's going on?" he asked, confusion flickering across his face. "Bill and Karen will be here in 2 hours." Claire looked up from her book calmly. "I know," she said simply. The strategic response replaces reaction in a way that was breathtaking in its simplicity. She didn't argue about fairness or rehash their kitchen conversation. She didn't explain that she'd told him she was exhausted or remind him that had dismissed her concerns. Instead, she simply said, "I decided not to host tonight. You're welcome to order takeout for your guests, but I won't be joining you. I have plans." Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, as if she were commenting on the weather rather than dismantling the entire power dynamic of their marriage. What made this moment so powerful was that boundaries enforced through action require no defense, no justification, no emotional labor. Claire wasn't asking for permission or seeking his approval. She wasn't trying to make him understand or waiting for him to validate her choice. She was simply exercising her right to protect her own well-being, and the quiet certainty in her posture made it clear this wasn't up for negotiation. No confrontation, no drama, just a woman choosing herself with the same calm head always used to dismiss her. David's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, panic as he realized that control slips away the moment compliance ends. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising for the first time. "This is incredibly selfish. What am I supposed to tell Bill?" And there it was, the silent revenge marriage dynamics reversing in real time. She wasn't trying to punish him or teach him a lesson. She was simply refusing to participate in a dynamic that required her diminishment, and that refusal, that simple, quiet refusal, held more power than any argument ever could. The next hour was fascinating to watch, like seeing a magician's tricks after someone had explained how they worked. David cycled through every manipulation tactic in his arsenal with increasing desperation. First came the attempts to reframe the narrative. "I thought we agreed this was fine. You said okay. You can't just change your mind at the last minute like this." He was trying to rewrite history, to make her quiet okay in the kitchen mean enthusiastic agreement rather than exhausted surrender, conveniently forgetting the entire conversation that preceded it. When that didn't work, the guilt and dismissal intensify in ways that would have destroyed her just a week ago. "You're being incredibly immature right now," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "This is my career we're talking about. Do you know how this makes me look? After everything I do for this family, you can't even do this one thing for me." The emotional power reversal was complete. Suddenly he was the victim, she was the perpetrator, and her simple act of self-preservation became evidence of her selfishness, her lack of support, her failure as a wife. But what truly unnerved David, what Claire could see in his eyes, was the confusion when tactics fail. For years, had operated under a specific set of assumptions that calling her reactions overreacting would make her doubt herself, that his calm tone gave him authority over reality, that she would always eventually comply to avoid conflict or his disappointment. And now, without warning, the formulas didn't work. She wasn't defending herself, which meant he had nothing to dismantle. She wasn't explaining, which meant he couldn't reframe. She was just done. The loss of dominance manifested in increasingly frantic behavior. He tried bargaining. "Okay, fine, I'll help you clean. We can do it together right now." Then anger, "You're sabotaging my career because you're too lazy to cook a meal." Then self-pity, "I can't believe you do this to me. I thought we were partners." Each tactic revealed the desperation of someone watching their carefully constructed control slip through their fingers. And Claire, sitting calmly with her book, felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the quiet, steady power of someone who'd finally stopped seeking validation from the person who'd weaponized withholding it. In the aftermath of that Friday night, after David had awkwardly ordered pizza for his boss and made excuses about a family emergency, after the tension-filled weekend that followed, after the silent treatment that she no longer found punishing but rather peaceful, Claire understood something profound: calm can be a weapon. For years, she'd believed that David's measured tone and rational demeanor meant he was right, that her emotional responses meant she was wrong. But she finally saw that his calmness wasn't wisdom or maturity, it was a tool he used to maintain control, to position her feelings as problems to be managed rather than truths to be honored. The lesson that changed everything was this: validation doesn't require permission from the person dismissing you. Claire had spent years trying to make David see her perspective, as if his acknowledgement would somehow make her feelings real, her needs legitimate, her experiences valid. But the toxic marriage story she'd been living taught her that waiting for your gaslighter to validate your reality is like waiting for a locked door to open itself. It's never going to happen, and the waiting only keeps you trapped. Her feelings were valid because she felt them, her needs mattered because she had them, and her reality was true because she lived it. What she discovered through this experience was that control ends when explanations stop. Every time she'd tried to justify her feelings or defend her perspective, she'd been handing David ammunition to use against her. He'd take her words, twist them, reframe them, use them as evidence of her irrationality. But when she simply acted on her own behalf without seeking his approval or understanding, there was nothing for him to manipulate. The female empowerment story wasn't about winning arguments or changing his mind, it was about recognizing that she didn't need him to agree with her reality for it to be true. And perhaps most importantly, she learned that power returns quietly, not through dramatic confrontations or ultimatums, but through the simple, revolutionary act of trusting yourself more than you trust someone else's interpretation of you. Claire's story isn't unique, it's the story of countless women who've been taught that their emotional responses are inherently suspicious, that asking for consideration is asking for too much, that calmness equals correctness regardless of content. But hey race, what nobody tells you: the person who stays calm while dismissing your humanity isn't evolved, they're manipulative. And the moment you stop seeking validation from someone invested in your self-doubt is the moment you reclaim the life that was always yours to live. So hey race, the question I want you to sit with tonight: how many times have you been told you're overreacting when you were simply reacting? How many of your perfectly reasonable responses to being dismissed, overlooked, or disrespected have been reframed as evidence of your instability rather than evidence of someone else's disregard? And if you can't remember the last time you trusted your own feelings without immediately questioning whether you have the right to feel them, what does that tell you about the relationship you're in? Claire's story isn't just about one woman and one kitchen argument gaslighting moment. It's about recognizing that calmness isn't the same as correctness, that the person who stays composed while invalidating your humanity isn't more mature than you, they're more manipulative. It's about understanding that you don't need someone's permission to trust your own experience, that your feelings don't require external validation to be real, and that the sanest thing you can do when someone keeps telling you you're crazy is to stop trying to convince them otherwise. The emotional power reversal that Claire experienced didn't happen because she finally found the perfect words to make David understand. It happened because she stopped believing that his understanding was necessary for her reality to be valid. That's the female empowerment story nobody tells you: that sometimes the most radical act isn't explaining yourself better, it's refusing to explain yourself at all. Your feelings don't need to make sense to the person who caused them. Your boundaries don't require approval from the person who violated them. And your reality doesn't become less true just because someone else refuses to acknowledge it. What have you been apologizing for that wasn't actually your fault? What feelings have you been suppressing because someone convinced you they were too much or overblown or dramatic? This is your reminder, not from me, but from yourself to yourself, that you're not overreacting. You're reacting to something real, something that matters, something that deserves to be honored rather than dismissed. And the people who truly love you won't require you to diminish your emotional truth to make them comfortable. If this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in Claire's journey from self-doubt to self-trust, or if you're ready to start believing your own perceptions again, I want to hear from you. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep exposing these dark relationship drama patterns that keep us small, silent, and second-guessing ourselves. We're going to keep shining light on the silent revenge marriage dynamics where choosing yourself isn't revenge at all, it's survival. Your reality is valid. Your feelings matter. And you deserve relationships where your emotional truth is treated as sacred, not suspicious.